That morning in Birmingham, Alabama, was wrapped in a light chill. Not enough for snow, but enough to make every breath visible and every fingertip sting without gloves. The wind whispered through the cracks between buildings, slipping its cold fingers into every layer of clothing. On 7th Avenue, where the Children's Medical Center stood, people bustled in and out. Each person wore a different expression, some tense, others quiet, like they were swallowing a pain too heavy to name. No one wanted to be at a hospital, especially not one for children. Scarves were pulled tight around necks, steaming coffee cups clutched in hands. Everyone moved quickly, as if a faster pace might let them outrun the helplessness clinging to their backs. And in the middle of all that hurry sat a child who didn't move, not drawing attention, not begging, simply there. He sat on a flattened piece of cardboard near the revolving door to the main lobby. The wind rustled the edge of his red knit beanie, pulled low across his forehead. His coat was far too big, sleeves rolled twice at the wrist. One of his worn-out boots was patched at the toe with old silver duct tape. Resting across his lap was a battered sketchbook, its edges frayed, several pages curled. A pencil stayed in his right hand, left arm holding the book steady. Every so often, he'd look up, study the stream of people, then return to sketching with quiet intensity. His name was Zeke, Ezekiel Carter, 9 years old. Zeke didn't beg. He didn't extend a hand or hold a cardboard sign asking for pity. He was just present. He drew. He watched. And when someone spoke to him, he smiled, a polite, gentle smile, like he had grown used to being ignored. Hospital staff had once tried to move him along. Security guards had scolded him a few times, but eventually they gave up. Zeke didn't cause trouble. He didn't ask for anything. He simply existed, like part of the building, like the sound of revolving doors or the quiet overhead announcements, something familiar enough that people stopped questioning it. Some believed he was waiting for a parent. Others assumed he had a sibling in treatment. Still others guessed he was just a homeless kid looking for a warm place to sit. But no one asked. In a place like a hospital, people learn to stay silent about what they don't understand, because everyone who walks through those doors carries a reason too personal to explain. That morning, a dark silver Range Rover pulled up in front of the hospital. Its lights were still on, engine running, but the driver didn't step out. In the driver's seat sat a man in his late 40s, streaks of gray lining his temples, his tie loose and shirt creased. That was Jonathan Reeves, a successful businessman, a man familiar with executive boardrooms and multi-million-dollar decisions. But today, he looked worn, hollow-eyed, and maybe broken. In the back seat, secured in a booster chair, sat his daughter, Issa, only 6 years old. Soft brown curls tucked behind one ear, her legs covered with a pale pink blanket. Issa sat still, wide-eyed, but said nothing. She had once been the kind of child who climbed trees, raced cousins barefoot, and filled a backyard with laughter. Then came the accident. In a blink, she was paralyzed from the waist down, silent, distant. The laughter vanished. Issa became a quiet little girl, locked in her own world, as though her small body had rejected every effort to connect with anything outside. Jonathan stepped out, opened the back door, and lifted his daughter gently, as if she were porcelain, delicate and easy to break. He glanced toward the hospital entrance, preparing for yet another appointment with yet another therapist. The kind of meeting where people say things like, "It takes time," "We can't promise," or "Try not to expect too much." At that moment, he didn't notice Zeke, but Zeke noticed him. The boy had been watching long before. Zeke raised his head, sharp eyes half hidden under the edge of his red beanie, watching the way Jonathan held Issa, tenderly, but with a weariness that said he feared she might fall apart. Issa's gaze was fixed on the sky, deliberately avoiding the building, as if it had stolen something from her. Zeke stood. He spoke, not loud, not hurried, but with a stillness that made the air pause. "Sir, I can help your daughter walk again." Jonathan froze mid-step, not because he was angry, not because he thought it was a joke, but because of how the boy said it, calm, clear, as though he believed every word. There was no hesitation, no bravado, just a strange certainty, as though this ragged little boy genuinely believed he could do the impossible, help a paralyzed child walk again. Jonathan turned, eyebrows drawn together in a frown. "What did you say?" Zeke stepped closer, hugging the sketchbook to his chest. "I said, I can help her walk again." On that cold, hurried morning, where no one had time to look anyone in the eye, something stopped. A chance meeting, a spark, the beginning of a thread that would pull lives towards something none of them saw coming. It was the moment a broken businessman and a nameless boy crossed paths, and neither of them, nor the world around them, would ever be the same. That afternoon, after all the medical appointments had ended and the golden light of late day streamed gently through the hospital windows, Jonathan still couldn't shake the image of the boy in the red knit cap from his mind. The doctor's words, "It takes time, too early to say, we recommend consistent therapy," echoed like wind through an empty room, hollow, weightless. But Zeke's words, spoken by a stranger, a child, cut through like a sharp whisper, small but deep enough to lodge in his chest. "I can help your daughter walk again." No one had ever said that to him with such conviction. As he stepped out of the hospital, Jonathan still carried Isa gently, the way he always did. Her eyes were half closed, cheeks pale. Day after day, she remained silent and still, like a leaf suspended in the air, unmoved by the wind. All he hoped for was her peace, but somewhere inside him, something resisted. This couldn't be the end for a 6-year-old girl. Then, as they reached the parking lot, he saw Zeke again, still there. Same cardboard mat, same sketchbook, same eyes that didn't flinch. Jonathan was going to walk past, he really was, but something in his steps slowed. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was something else. Either way, he turned back. "You again," he murmured, staring at the boy. "Why did you say that? You think this is a joke?" Zeke didn't shrug, didn't smirk. He shook his head slowly and said, "It's not a joke, sir. I don't know everything about your daughter, but I believe I can help." "Who do you think you are?" Jonathan's voice sharpened. "You're just a kid sitting outside a hospital with duct-taped boots and a sketchbook. What could you possibly know about treatment?" Zeke lowered his eyes. His voice went softer, but not weaker. "My mom used to help people walk again. She was a physical therapist. Every afternoon after school, I'd go with her to the community center. I watched her work with people who had been paralyzed, who had lost hope. I didn't just watch, I learned." Jonathan stood frozen for a moment. His mind swirled with doubt. Was this real? Was this child delusional? Was it some kind of setup? But then he realized Zeke hadn't asked for money, not once. He wasn't selling hope. He was simply offering a chance. 1 hour, one chance. A silence stretched between them. And in that pause, Isa opened her eyes and looked at Zeke for the first time. She didn't seem afraid or even hesitant. She just looked, curious. That look alone made Jonathan speak. "All right, you want to prove something? Meet me tomorrow, noon, Harrington Park. Don't be late." Zeke nodded firmly, like he had always known this moment would come. The next morning, the sun was out, but it didn't make things any warmer. Jonathan dressed Isa carefully, as he always did for outings: wool hat, lap blanket, gloves, and a thermos of warm water. Despite the lingering skepticism in his heart, he kept his word. Maybe it was fatigue, maybe it was a desperate sort of courage. When they arrived at Harrington Park, Zeke was already there, sitting beneath the large oak tree. No need to call out, no need to look. He was exactly where he said he'd be. This time, Zeke didn't carry his sketchbook. Instead, he had a small gym bag at his feet. On the bench beside him lay a neatly folded towel, a jar of cocoa butter, a tennis ball, and a cloth-wrapped pouch, still warm, like it had just come from a microwave. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "What is all this? Folk medicine?" Zeke kept his tone steady. "No magic, just things my mom used. Warm rice to relax the muscles, the balls for pressure points, the cocoa butters for massage. The body listens when it's treated right." Jonathan hesitated, then leaned down and asked softly, "Isa, do you want to try?" She didn't speak, but nodded once. And so the first session began. Zeke didn't rush. He laid out the towel under Isa's legs, gently placed the warm rice pouch on her thighs, and asked, "Too hot?" She shook her head. "Feels good." He began rotating her ankles slowly, moving her joints with care. Jonathan stood close, watching, ready to intervene at the slightest hint of discomfort. But there was no pain, no strain, just a series of motions, steady, intentional, almost like a lullaby played by hand. "You done this before?" Jonathan asked. "I helped my mom," Zeke replied. "She helped a soldier walk again after 5 years in a wheelchair. No machines, just faith and patience." As he worked, Zeke chatted with Isa. He asked about her favorite food, her favorite color, the cartoons she liked. At first, her replies were brief, but as the minutes passed, she asked questions too. It was as if some part of her, long dormant, was slowly waking up. After 30 minutes, Zeke tapped her knee gently. "Can you feel anything yet?" Isa frowned slightly. "Kind of heavy?" Jonathan held his breath. "She says that sometimes when they use machines," he murmured. Zeke nodded. "There are trees here, wind, no beeping monitors. Sometimes kids are scared of machines, they tighten up. But out here, everything relaxes." The session ended in silence. There was no miracle. Isa didn't stand, but something had been stirred. Her eyes didn't look as empty. There was a flicker, faint but real. Jonathan pulled out his wallet, took out a $20 bill, and held it out. Zeke stepped back, shaking his head. "I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing it because she smiled today." Jonathan turned to look at Isa, and he saw it. A smile, small, almost imperceptible, but real. That evening, back in his home office, Jonathan didn't work. The contracts, emails, reports, they all blurred together. He kept thinking about the boy with the beat-up gym bag and the quiet conviction. Not in himself, but in someone else's ability to heal. And for the first time in many months, when Isa poked her head into the room and asked, "Daddy, that boy, he really thinks I can walk again, doesn't he?" Jonathan looked up at her and saw a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. Not a promise, not certainty, just something else entirely. Hope. And in his chest, dangerous, delicate, and long buried, Jonathan felt it too. Hope. The following Sunday, the sky felt higher than usual. Sunlight lay gently across the grass of Harrington Park, usually deserted at midday. Young leaves swayed slightly in the breeze, and the wind was just soft enough to make one's heart feel a little lighter. Zeke had arrived early again, seated beneath the same old oak tree as the week before. He spread out his towel in the exact same spot, arranging each item with quiet care. Not because anyone asked him to, but because he believed respect for the person you help begins with the smallest of things. The cloth pouch of rice had been reheated, the cocoa butter jar was tightly sealed, The tennis ball looked brand new, almost like he was preparing for a sacred ritual, not just an improvised therapy session in the park. At 12:07, the familiar silver Range Rover pulled up a few meters from the grass. Jonathan stepped out, his eyes carrying their usual caution, though the sharp skepticism had faded. Isa sat in the back seat, her hair neatly tied by her mother, her eyes brighter than they were the week before. When Zeke waved, she waved back, just slightly, but enough to warm a stranger's heart. Jonathan didn't say much. He lifted Isa gently, set her down on the towel, and stepped back with arms folded. He wasn't cold, but not entirely trusting either, just caught in that fragile middle ground, like the surface of a still lake. "Hi, Isa," Zeke said softly, crouching in front of her. "Hi," Isa replied, her voice small but clear. Jonathan frowned. "You know her name?" Zeke smiled. "You said it last week. I remembered." That answer made Jonathan nod faintly. He said nothing more. The session began as it had before, warm rice to soften the muscles, the tennis ball rolled gently under her foot, cocoa butter massaged into her hips and knees. But this time, Zeke changed something. "Isa, try closing your eyes. When I touch your leg, just say yes if you feel anything." Jonathan stood nearby, watching every reaction with tight focus. Zeke tapped lightly on her thigh. Nothing. Then her knee. Still nothing. Then he pressed his finger into her right ankle. Isa blinked. "Feel anything?" Zeke asked. Like something touched me. Not strong," she whispered. Jonathan stepped closer. "Really, sweetheart?" Isa nodded. Zeke looked up at Jonathan. He didn't say a word. In his eyes, there was no pride, no victory, just quiet certainty, like a gardener who sees the first green shoot rising from frozen soil. From that day forward, every Sunday became their silent appointment. The next week, Isa moved her toe. The week after that, she tilted her foot slightly to the left. Each movement was small, but to the Reeves family and to Zeke, they were quiet miracles. One day, during a session, as Jonathan knelt to massage Isa's leg following Zeke's instructions, he asked, "Why do you do this, Zeke? It's not for money. No one's making you. You're just a kid. Why do you keep showing up every week?" Zeke was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I remember what it felt like when my mom helped someone stand again. They didn't just walk. It was like they came back to life." Jonathan nodded, but deep down another feeling stirred, something closer, as if he were no longer the helpless father standing on the sidelines watching his child suffer, but now he was part of the process. He wasn't just observing, he was helping. And then came the day when everything nearly fell apart. That week, Isa refused to leave the house. She was angry, silent. She wouldn't speak. Jonathan had to carry her to the car while she resisted. By the time they arrived at the park, her eyes were red, arms tightly crossed. Zeke knelt beside her and whispered, "What's wrong?" Isa turned away. "This morning, I tried to lift my leg. Nothing happened. I hate waiting. I'm tired." Zeke sat beside her, saying nothing at first. Then he began to speak. "One time, my mom couldn't buy her medicine. I saw her cry. I even yelled because I was so frustrated. But then she hugged me. She said, 'You're allowed to be sad, but don't let sadness put out the light inside you.'" Isa turned toward him. "I'm scared." Jonathan heard it. It was the first time Isa had admitted that out loud. Zeke smiled gently. "Being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you're getting close to something important." That sentence, it was like a lock unlatching in Jonathan's chest. All the pain, the anger, the sorrow he'd carried for months suddenly felt like they were being quietly removed, not rushed, not shouted down, just lifted with the right words, the right look, the right hand that didn't pull away. Isa wiped her eyes and nodded. "Let's try again," she said. That afternoon, Isa moved her whole right foot, not just her toes, not just her ankle. Her entire foot slid slowly across the towel, leaving a small crease, visible to everyone watching. Jonathan dropped to his knees, staring at his daughter, then at Zeke. She just did that, didn't she? Zeke didn't speak. He simply nodded, quietly, like everything that needed to be said was already in his eyes. And in that fleeting moment, in the middle of an old park, under the shade of an oak tree, a father found his faith again. A little girl found her will to live again. And a boy, one who seemed to have no one, turned out to be the one who gave the most. That morning, Zeke woke up earlier than usual. Though it was just another Sunday like any other, there was something different stirring inside him. It wasn't nervousness, it wasn't worry, it was a feeling, quiet yet clear, as if something important was about to happen. Something he couldn't name, but his body had sensed it before the sun had even risen. He arrived at Harrington Park when the ground was still damp with dew. The sky was calm, thin clouds drifting lazily. The oversized coat draped on his shoulders, what his mother used to call her healer's coat, wasn't for warmth, it was for presence. When he wore it, he felt like his mother was still nearby, sitting behind him, smiling, nodding, silently handing him her quiet trust. Zeke laid out the towel on the familiar patch of grass under the old oak tree, a tree that had grown used to the laughter of children and the clatter of wheelchairs every week. He arranged his tools like a sacred ritual. The rice bag reheated more thoroughly than usual, the cocoa butter nearly gone but still enough, the freshly washed cloth. Everything was placed precisely, as if he were preparing for something sacred, though no one had said it aloud. At 11:59, the Range Rover pulled up. Jonathan stepped out first, not in a suit this time. A gray t-shirt and simple jeans replaced his usual uniform, and his face looked calmer than usual. He said nothing as he lifted Isa out of the car, but one thing was visibly different. Isa was smiling. Not the shy smile she'd shown before. This was a focused, determined smile, as if something inside her had finally clicked into readiness and nothing could stop it now. Zeke stood up and smiled, just as he always did. "Hi, Isa." "Hi, Zeke," Isa replied, her voice steady. No one needed instructions. Jonathan wheeled her to the usual spot, on the grass beneath the oak tree. The three of them settled in. No passers-by paid them any mind, but somehow the air felt slower. Zeke knelt beside Isa and gently asked, "Do you remember the steps?" Isa nodded. "Yes. Start with a deep breath, then warm the muscles, then focus on the knees." Zeke smiled softly. "Very good." He began as he had before, the warm compress, the gentle massage, the joint movements. But this time, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't therapy anymore. It felt like the fulfillment of a promise. Each touch was a preparation for a moment that could change everything. Jonathan stood behind his daughter, hands under her arms, ready to support her if needed. Zeke whispered, "This time, let's try standing. No need to walk, just stand. If you feel tired, you can sit back down. That's okay. But if you feel you can, give your body a chance to remember." Isa inhaled deeply, her eyes closed. Her small face tightened, not from fear, but pure concentration, as if she were trying to hear a very faint sound deep inside, trying to restore a lost connection. Zeke placed his hands gently on her knees, adjusting her posture. Jonathan tightened his grip slightly beneath her arms. "Ready?" Zeke said quietly. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Together, they moved. Jonathan lifted Isa's torso gently, Zeke held her knees firmly, and then... Her small body trembled, her legs braced, her knees no longer limp, they were holding weight. Isa stood. Not tall, not steady, but she stood. No one spoke for several seconds. They didn't need to. The wind stopped, The grass didn't stir. The whole park seemed to hold its breath. Jonathan let go. Issa remained upright. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, but no sound came. Zeke stood too, stepping back, no longer touching Issa. "You're standing, Issa," he said softly. Issa opened her eyes. She looked straight ahead. She didn't fall. She didn't need to be held. A moment stretched long and wide. Then she said, "Daddy, I'm standing." Jonathan dropped to his knees and hugged his daughter, tears falling freely. "You did it. You really did it." Issa laughed, a big laugh, the biggest since the accident. "Zeke said I could, and I believed him." Zeke stepped back again. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply watched, like a gardener watching a flower bloom for the first time. Not boastful, just quiet, full. That afternoon, no one left the park right away. A few other families, those who had heard whispers of Zeke, were also there, quietly observing. They didn't clap, they didn't cheer. They stood back, some of them crying softly. And as the others moved among wheelchairs and walking canes and picnic cloths, Zeke remained in his usual seat under the oak tree. He didn't speak, he didn't act like someone who'd done something great. He just sat, hand resting lightly on his old sketchbook, looking up at the sky. Something had ended, but something had also begun. That evening, in Jonathan's kitchen, warm light glowed over every breath. Issa sat at the table, excitedly retelling the moment she stood up to her aunt on the phone. She used her hands to mimic walking, even though she was still seated. Jonathan stood at the sink, hands still on the dishes. He turned to look at Zeke, who was pouring cereal into a bowl. "Zeke," he said, voice low, "you know, today you changed everything." Zeke didn't look up. He answered softly, "I know." Jonathan walked over and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Not a doctor, not medicine, not machines. My daughter stood up because a boy no one noticed believed it was possible." Zeke turned and looked at him. "It's what my mom would have done, and I think she saw it." Jonathan said nothing. He just squeezed Zeke's shoulder gently. For the first time in many years, the hollow ache inside him was gone. In its place was a quiet light, warm as the sun after rain. It was trust, and it was love. 1 week after the day Issa stood up, Harrington Park was no longer just a place for 3 people. That Sunday, when Zeke arrived, he was surprised to find 2 families already waiting. A boy about 10 years old leaned against a walker, knees wrapped in bandages, eyes filled with nervous uncertainty. A little girl sat in a wheelchair, pale-faced, clutching a worn teddy bear tightly. No one said anything when Zeke approached, only their eyes spoke. Not pleading, not pressure, just hope. Zeke nodded in greeting, placing his bag beside the familiar oak tree. Jonathan stepped out of the car, carrying a larger blanket and a folding chair. Issa came along, this time not being carried. She was pushed in her wheelchair, sitting upright, eyes bright, hands gripping the rails. When they reached the spot, Zeke knelt beside Issa and whispered, "Issa, do you mind if I help the other kids first today?" She shook her head, smiling. "It's okay. I want to see them start, like I did." And so Zeke began again, but this time with others. He sat in front of the boy with the walker, introduced himself, asked what the boy liked to eat, his favorite color. The boy was shy, glancing at his parents for reassurance. But when Zeke pulled out the small rice bag, gently held the boy's knee, and said, "We're not here to hurt, just to help the body start listening again," the boy nodded. And so, under the old tree in the quiet park, hands touched parts of the body long forgotten. Zeke didn't just guide movements, he shared his story, step by step, of afternoons spent with his mother at refugee camps and community centers. helping those once believed to be beyond help feel life again in their limbs. The body doesn't forget, Zeke said. It just stays silent when it's been ignored too long. If we're patient, it'll speak again. By afternoon, the session ended. Issa helped pack up the items. Jonathan sat on the bench, quietly observing the space that was no longer still. As they were leaving, a mother rushed to Zeke, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Would you help my son again? I'll pay you. Anything." Zeke stepped back, shook his head. "I don't take money, but I'll help. If your family wants to learn, I'll teach." The mother was speechless, only bowing in gratitude as tears streamed silently. Word spread quickly. The following Sunday, 5 families came. A local pastor brought plastic chairs. A nearby diner brought pastries and coffee. A simple flyer was printed, just a few lines. Free movement for disabled children, Sundays, 12 p.m., Harrington Park, under the oak tree. No mention of Zeke's name. He didn't want it. One afternoon, when everyone had left, Jonathan approached Zeke, who was cleaning the tennis ball with a cloth. "Would you like to stay here permanently?" Zeke froze. "You mean?" "Live with us. Your own room, meals, a bed." Zeke lowered his head. "I don't know. Will your neighbors mind having a homeless kid like me around?" Jonathan chuckled gently. "If anyone has something to say after what you've done for my daughter, they should be the ones to leave, not you." Zeke didn't reply, but the next day, he showed up with a backpack holding a few clothes and a neatly folded old blanket. Issa ran to open the door. "Zeke!" He smiled. "Hey there, superstar." Jonathan opened the door, wearing a light sweater, coffee mug in hand. "Right on time. Come in. This is your home, if you want it." Zeke didn't say thank you. He just stepped inside. But in his heart, a new door had opened. In the following weeks, things gradually settled into a rhythm. Zeke woke early each morning. Even on weekdays, he helped Issa with a few exercises. Jonathan, though busy, learned how to massage and stretch muscles just as Zeke had shown. One evening, while washing dishes, Jonathan asked, "Have you thought about going back to school?" Zeke, sketching at the dining table, looked up. "I used to think no one needed a kid like me, but now I want to learn again. Not for grades. I want to learn so I can help more people." Jonathan turned, warmth in his eyes. "Then I'll make it happen. We'll start with registration, then scholarships. You're not doing this alone." Zeke smiled. "I know, because I'm not alone anymore." One Sunday, a nurse from the children's hospital happened to walk by the park. She froze, recognizing the girl who had been immobile for months. Beside her was a boy she vaguely remembered, the one who used to sit outside the hospital with a sketchbook. She said nothing, only stood from afar, later telling her colleagues. 3 days later, a small article appeared in the local paper. "A nameless boy helps children stand through heart and persistence." Zeke didn't like attention, but he couldn't stop the news from spreading. A doctor offered to mentor him, a rehabilitation center wanted to donate equipment, a teacher volunteered to tutor him to catch up on school. Zeke didn't say yes right away, but he knew a door was opening, and this time he wasn't afraid to step through. That evening, in the kitchen, while Issa colored at the table and Jonathan read the newspaper, Zeke stood quietly, taking it all in. A home with warm light, with voices, with meals on time. No one asked him what he could do. No one needed proof of his worth. They just needed him, to be himself. Jonathan noticed his expression. He approached and gently patted Zeke's shoulder. "Zeke, you've given my daughter something I thought we lost forever. Not just her legs, her smile, her faith." Zeke whispered, "I just did what my mother used to do. And you're continuing it, but in your own way." Zeke looked up, eyes glowing with something close to peace. I'm not stopping." 9 weeks had passed since the morning young Zeke Carter sat on a cardboard box outside the children's hospital and whispered a strange promise. "I can help your daughter walk again." Now, every Sunday, Harrington Park was no longer just a quiet stretch of grass under the afternoon sun. It had become a place of beginnings, where forgotten children learned to trust their bodies again, and where once helpless parents learned how to soothe their children's unspoken pain with their hands and their patience. Zeke still always came early, always carrying the same old fabric bag filled with humble items: tennis balls, rice bags, cloth towels, and a jar of cocoa butter. Nothing sophisticated, but enough to work miracles for those who dared to hope. His oversized coat was now even older, the cuffs frayed, but Zeke kept wearing it because he believed his mother, the one who had once walked beside him through relief stations, who once placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Be the healer in silence," was still present in every small act he performed. That morning, something felt different. Everyone sensed it, even if no one spoke it aloud. Issa sat under the old oak tree, no longer in her wheelchair. She now sat in a small folding chair, her legs extended straight out, feet in new sneakers. She didn't smile or laugh, but her eyes held a quiet, resolute strength. Zeke sat in front of her, his hands resting on her knees as usual. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice very soft. Issa nodded. "Today, I want to try walking." Jonathan, who had been standing a few meters away, had his eyes fixed on the two children, one who had once lost everything and one who had once had nothing. But today, they were the center of a miracle. Zeke looked around. "I need you to help her balance from behind." Jonathan stepped forward, kneeling behind his daughter. He rested his hands lightly on Issa's waist, only there to catch her if she faltered. He didn't guide, didn't lead, just stood as a support. The hands of a father who had once let go were now the wings behind his child. Zeke gently supported Issa's knees. "We're not rushing, just one step." Issa took a deep breath. Her small shoulders quivered. Zeke counted. 1, 2, 3. Issa lifted her right foot. It trembled, woggled, but touched the ground. Steady. Zeke said nothing. Jonathan held his breath. Then Issa lifted her left foot. The sound of her shoe brushing the grass rang out like a bell, marking the start of a new season. She had taken 2 steps. The third step faltered slightly, but before she could fall, she leaned into her father. Jonathan caught her, not in fear, but in tears. "You did it," he whispered. Issa buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing. "I walked, Daddy. I really did." Zeke stood still. He didn't cheer, didn't beam, didn't play the hero. He just stepped back, his eyes gleaming like there was sunlight shining from within. That afternoon, nobody rushed to leave. People stayed, sitting on the grass, sharing fruit, coffee, and untold stories. One boy managed to stand up 3 times in a row. A girl moved her wrist for the first time. A father learned how to warm a rice towel. A mother figured out how to massage her son's calves without making him cry. Zeke moved between the groups, asking, observing, and guiding with a soft voice and focused eyes. He didn't make speeches, he didn't command, but his presence was enough to make everyone feel safe, seen, acknowledged, even for the tiniest motion. After that session, Zeke received several invitations. A charity offered him a scholarship to study therapy. A clinic invited him to intern informally. A high school offered to enroll him directly into the 8th grade if he was ready. Zeke stayed quiet. He didn't answer right away. One evening, in the warm kitchen, while Jonathan washed glasses and Issa sketched at the table, Zeke put down his pen. "Mr. Jonathan," he began. Jonathan turned around. "Yes, son." I want to go back to school, but not for grades. I want to know how to help more people, deeper. I want to become someone like my mom used to be." Jonathan didn't reply immediately. He set down the dish towel, folded it, and placed it on the table. Then he walked over and placed a hand on Zeke's shoulder. "You don't need to become anyone, Zeke. You're already someone worth admiring. But if you want to go further, I'll go with you." Zeke looked up. "I'm not going alone anymore." No, never again. Months later, people began calling Harrington Park the walking park. Not because of magic, but because in that place, hopeless legs had begun to move. Closed hearts had started to open. Local TV stations picked up the story. A 15-minute segment showed Zeke kneeling to massage a young girl's legs, Jonathan sitting cross-legged on a mat nearby, following each motion. In the distance, Issa taught another boy how to balance. They didn't need recognition. They just needed to keep going. One Sunday afternoon at the end of spring, after everyone had gone, Zeke sat alone. In his hands was his old sketchbook, the cover nearly torn. He flipped to the last page, where he had once drawn a girl standing up in the middle of the park under the oak tree, arms outstretched as if to embrace the world. Zeke smiled. He had drawn that before it ever came true. The wind rustled through his coat. An oak leaf fell, rolling across his sleeve. Zeke looked up at the sky and whispered softly, "Mom, you saw that, didn't you?" There was no reply, just the golden sunlight stroking his hair. And somewhere in that park full of leaves and laughter, a once invisible boy had become the one who led the way for the very first steps.